Hello and welcome to my channel. Today's video is about the importance of water in life and consciousness. Water plays a role in all biological systems on Earth, and it makes up more than half the human body. So, since it makes up half the human body and everyone's interested in living a healthy life, don't you think you should learn a little bit more about it? And science is starting to understand that question and starting to understand the differences of liquid water and how its structure is incorporated in the structure of life, or maybe it's the fundamental framework of the structure of life on Earth from its origin all the way to now. If you would like to read on more of its origin, you can read my paper, Liquid-Liquid Phase Separation as a Driver of Abiogenesis and Evolution. And if you want to read more about the mechanisms that it governs, like photosynthesis in plants, the detection of the Earth's magnetic field in birds, or the roles it plays in the brain, in consciousness, and in embryogenesis and stuff like that, you can read chapter 4 in a book, Quantum Mechanics of Biological Systems. Chapter 4 is titled Chaos to Coherence, A Path to Molecular Organization, and it was written by me and my former boss, along with this paper on the origin of life and evolution. I also wanted to put a picture of one of my favorite songs right now. It's called "I'ma Have a Good Time" by Afro Man. And I didn't have the best morning this morning, so I wanted to get myself in the right mood to make this video, so I decided to listen to this right before. So if you find yourself in a bad mood, why don't you send some of these frequencies through your brain and through the water in your brain so it can turn your bad day into a good day, and you can learn something that can help you out for the rest of your life. And it has a really good beat to it, and besides that, it's the normal Afro man who sings very humorous raps. So anyway, there are many different structures of water, but what we think of as liquid water exists in it's a constant fluctuation of structure, and the structure like a hexagonal or dodecahedral or just some type of polygonal structure, which is low density because there's a lot of space in between the water molecules, and then a high density whenever these water molecules get closer together, it's denser. So liquid water is a constant fluctuation between these two states where the water is compact together, high density, and then when it looks like this, where it's low density. And one example of the low density structure is ice, which you can see forming right here. So you have these different ice crystals where water forms these polygonal or hexagonal structures in 2 dimensions. And that creates the low density form of water, and that's why ice floats. So that structure of ice, which renders it to have more space, is why ice floats in water compared to the liquid portion that's just fluctuating between something that looks like this and something that's compact that has a higher density. So water is constantly liquid water is constantly fluctuating between those two states. When it freezes, it gets trapped into this state, and that's ice. There's also stabilized structured forms of water in liquid water, and that's what's used for life through liquid-liquid phase separation. And we'll get more into that in later slides. So just to go over how liquid water fluctuates and stays together is down to the molecular structure. You have a hydrogen, two hydrogen, which are in white right here, and they have a little bit of a positive charge compared to the oxygen, which has two lone pairs of electrons, which gives it a negative charge. So since you have those positive and negative charges, just like magnets, they can combine in different configurations so that all of these water molecules have some attractive or repelling force that keeps them together in a fluid motion. So those forces are called hydrogen bonds. So that's the intermolecular bonds between different water molecules shown in blue right here. And that's what gives water a surface tension. So you can understand that the surface tension on all the water molecules on this pond allows it to function as a dynamic surface. So it's still a surface where you hit it and it's solid, but it's also fluid and flexible. So that allows you to skip rocks across the surface of the water. And it happens in a very interesting way because if you throw a stone at the perfect angle, and I learned how to do this when I was pretty young, going traveling to Tennessee and playing by creeks when I was little, or going to the camp at a lake that my family has and just throwing rocks into the lake or into the canals and trying to get it to skip faster. And what I found was if you spin the rock, so to illustrate it, it has this here. So if you spin this and throw it at the perfect angle, then it will actually just continue to almost be like a boat going through the water right here at this angle, at this steep angle, and it will just keep skipping many times a lot further than you would think. And this doesn't happen if you throw it on concrete or a solid surface because whenever the back of the stone hits the water, then the front end is going to come forward and you're going to lose all of that energy. But instead, when you throw it at the surface, when you throw a stone at a liquid surface, then it can keep this angle and it's not actually going to bounce forward. It's just going to keep skipping from spot to spot so that it'll actually go a lot further than you think. But it takes many times to get it perfect so that you can get this experience and see this mechanism happen in front of you. But you can practice, and if you find you have to have the right stone too. If you get the right stone, you spin it right, you throw it at the right angle, then you'll skip rocks like this across the surface of the water. And the reason why that occurs is because you're using the fluid energy of these hydrogen bonds to bounce that water and give it energy so that it can keep on going. So that's a very down to earth way of explaining the hydrogen bonds and how water has this fluctuating energy that it's constantly and fluidly exchanging water molecules from high to low density configurations. So we'll get into a little bit just the chemistry and the physics behind this, just for all you scientifically minded people who would like to know that. So we already explained this picture, but to give it further clarification, you have these hydrogens in blue that are basically protons because the electrons are pulled closer to the two lone pairs of electron that's on the white oxygen right here. So you have most of the electrons right here by the oxygen, and the hydrogens are left positively charged, and that's why a lot of the times they're just called protons in water. So you also have acid-base chemistry. So one of these hydrogen can actually jump on another water molecule, and that forms a hydronium ion, which is acidic because it's ready. The whole molecule is kind of positively charged since it has an extra hydrogen, and it's ready to move back and give away a hydrogen or a proton. So that's what an acid is. It's something that gives a proton away. And then you have an hydroxide ion that forms. It's basic because it's ready to accept another hydrogen. So an acid is ready to give a hydrogen, and a base is ready to accept it. And water is very interesting acid-base chemistry because it can constantly fluctuate these charges so that you can have hydrogen going from one molecule to another because the hydroxide ion and the hydronium ion are both pretty stable. So you can have many different configurations of water, but for the remaining, from a chemical standpoint, acid-base chemistry standpoint. But for the rest of the slides, we're just going to talk about H2O and its normal electromagnetic effects and how that can organize water in different ways and in different structures of your body to give it fractal organization and to organize the DNA and proteins like collagen, the fibers, which ultimately gives the body and all of life on Earth fractal organization. It's all from the way that water organizes itself. So there's many different papers written on this. You can look at this paper right here, which details this high density and low density forms of water. The high density forms are just all aggregated together and don't really have any shape. And then the lower density forms, the dodecahedron or hexagonal forms, or lower density because it has more space in between the water molecules. And these two shapes are constantly, the high density and low density, are fluctuating constantly in liquid water. And then when ice freezes, it takes on this hexagonal shape. But life, to form all its fractal branching structure, it actually uses this dodecahedron low density form of water. So let's explain that a little bit more. And this is kind of an oversimplification, but this is just so pretty much everyone can understand. And I'll make, if this video is popular, I'll make more videos in the future getting into the science and talking about formulas of electromagnetism and getting into the chemistry and how it interacts with intrinsically disordered proteins in biology. But for now, we're going to do a simplified version of how this works. So the electron cloud is coupled to the local electromagnetic environment. And the electron cloud is just talking about one water molecule, but the electromagnetic environment that it's in is other water molecules, also ions like potassium and sodium and all the other minerals and that's in the body. And it could also be the nucleic acids and amino acids part of DNA, RNA, and proteins that are all part of the electromagnetic environment that is dictating and constraining the electron cloud on each water molecule, which subsequently creates all of these polygonal structures that you see in the whole environment together. But we're going to oversimplify it, reduce it, and explain it one water molecule at a time. So you have, let me get my pointer. You have ice, you have liquid water, and you have vapor. So, and it's all H2O. I'm not an artist. I'm just doing the best I can here. And you, again, you have these two on the pi bonds of the water molecule. You have lone pairs of electrons. And the geometry of these hydrogen and lone pairs is a tetrahedral geometry. But again, for this, we're going to oversimplify it. and we're just going to show you as a little electron cloud. So in ice, whenever you have the low density form of water and it's all organized in a pretty static geometry of hexagonal arrangements of water, you can think of it as the electron cloud is very constrained and not really able to move much because it's just stuck in this polygonal shape. So you have the most constraints from the neighboring water molecules. And then in water vapor, it's a lot, the electron cloud, you can think of it is a lot bigger. It doesn't have, it's not as much, it's not as constrained, and it's allowed to go wherever it wants to go, basically. So the probability of where it's going to go in the energy landscape is a lot more diverse than in ice, where the electrons are being constrained. And again, this is a little bit of an oversimplification, a lot of an oversimplification, because there's actually very complicated tetrahedral geometry and more complex geometry when it all comes together. But this will give you the a general understanding of what's going on. And then you have liquid, which is kind of in between this constrained and this unconstrained water dynamics from the interaction and coupling with the local electromagnetic field. So you can think of liquid water, it can be wherever it wants. It can come in a little bit, or the electron cloud can go out. And that's what gives it its fluctuating liquid, very dynamic environment, because since it can just adapt its structure based off the environment, it gives the whole system kind of a liquid, flexible structure. And life can use this flexibility that's also constrained in a way to have a basic structure. So let's get more into that basic structure after I erase all this. So it's not on the next slides. We look at, okay. So now let's look at the next slide. And you can see that water can form two-dimensional arrangements in a hexagonal ring. It can also form, and so that's six, and then it can form a pentagon with five waters. And then if you combine 12 of those pentagons together, you get a dodecahedron. So this is how water can form two-dimensional polygons and three-dimensional polygons. And the interesting characteristic about polygons is when you combine them together, especially the three-dimensional dodecahedron configuration, then you can end up getting branching patterns like the ones you see here. And these aren't the only branching patterns you can get. It's a fractal, so it can form many different types of geometries that are self-similar and repeating. So to continue, you see fractal geometry and branching geometry in all of life. And that's because all of life on Earth utilizes this structure of water. If you're talking about trees, if you're talking about the brain and its configuration, if you're talking about a single neuron, which is shown right here, if you're talking about the structure of the heart or the whole circulatory system, it all has fractal organization because it's using water, the hydrogen bonding of water, the electromagnetism of water, the structure of all that it's using as a scaffolding to build different living beings. So you're talking about trees, humans, any animal, any living being, any bacterium, even on Earth, utilizes this structure of water, which renders it with fractal branching organization. So to continue, let's just talk about how this works in snowflakes, and the brain is often compared to a snowflake because all snowflakes have their own individuality, just like the human brain and just like the personalities of people. So this is uh, when it's when ice is just starting to form. You can see in these black areas, you can imagine that it's still the liquid water, even though it would be a lot more of them. And then whenever it starts to form these structures, it becomes less dense and starts to combine together. And as all of this ice starts to form, eventually you get something that looks like this, which is the fractal pattern of all the different water molecules binding together in ice that's still about to form, that still has some portions that aren't totally forming ice, but I just wanted to put these two images here so you can understand the fractal structure of water from a molecular standpoint, and how that eventually leads to the structure of ice crystals or snowflakes, which you can see one forming right here. So you can see this same geometry in a neuron, which I have the structure of a neuron depicted right here. And you can think that the structure of neuron has many different branching structures, part of its arms or pseudopodia that are extending out from it, forming axons. So you can see that it has similar branching structure, just like the branching structure of a snowflake and just like the branching structure of a tree. And this all comes from the intermolecular binding patterns of water. So why is this important from a molecular standpoint? Is because it organizes DNA and proteins like collagen. And DNA and other nucleic acids like RNA constitute a- all of life and all of the information carrying molecules on life. And the information that they carry is how to make proteins like collagen. And you have water that organizes it all together. You can see the water molecules in blue and red for DNA and in blue for collagen. So one of the driving forces behind this is osmosis, but in the body, and you can think of the solute being the DNA, RNA, or proteins, and through osmosis, because you have the area of low concentration of solutes, so you don't have a lot of proteins or RNA or DNA, that water has a lot more energy because it's just in its completely liquid state. So you have a lot of that dense forms of water that are close together and constantly reorganizing. So that creates a lot of energy that can be used, and that pushes some water molecules to be in a more stable and less dense form, and it can form a structure around all these solute molecules. For instance, you can use salt to do this experiment, but you can also use collagen, DNA, or RNA to show how this works. And then whenever you have a concentration of solute molecules that are stabilizing that water, the more energetic water molecules that are in the completely aqueous state that has a lot of less dense and some high dense region, they'll all be trying to get to that more stable high dense region, so it'll move to all these solute molecules so that they can be stabilized and organized in low density states. So it basically not only it can form structures in the body, but it's also dynamic, so it can reorganize things in the body to where it's a dynamic scaffolding. And that's why it's perfect for information processing in the brain, for instance. You can think of little bitty microstructures in the brain of water molecules storing information, and that's pretty much what governs your thoughts, the dynamics of your thoughts. That's why when you're trying to learn something new, it's hard because you have to reorganize every single little water molecule in your brain to try to understand something new. And that's why it's also hard to keep healthy, because you can think of when you're born, every water molecule in a certain dynamic state exists in a certain geometry or structure. And as you age, everything gets a little bit disorganized. But if we do the right things and have a positive attitude, eat correctly, drink enough water, of course, every day, if we do all those things, then we can make those circuits of water and geometrical patterns of water, we can make them remember the states they used to be in. So even that's the cool thing about this, is because since it's dynamic, it also can regenerate to previous states. So if you do the right thing, you can always get healthy again. And that's like the main mechanism of regeneration. So that leads me to the take home, which is drink enough water. They say 2 liters a day, and pay attention what you mix in with that water. You don't want to eat bad. You want to eat nutritious meals. So maybe don't always get steak and potatoes. You can get a steak and a salad, or eat a steak with some vegetables and fruit and stuff like that. So you need all your vitamins and minerals, especially things like CoQ10 for your energy and metabolism, and all your different vitamins that you need. There's many different forms of even simple vitamins like vitamin E. There's 8 different forms of vitamin E. So really try to learn about this, because all of these different things you can think of that you put in your body dictate how this water is going to get organized and how efficient that organization is for to live in the environment. So you have to really think what chemicals and stuff you're putting in your body. So I hope you like this. Have a good one and listen to some Afro Man. Please like and subscribe if you want more.